Thank you, everyone, for attending today's Raleigh City Council budget work session. I'm going to turn this over to our city manager to take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and to our viewing audience. Today, we will kick off the FY23 budget process with our first work session. We have two major topics today, looking at HR and all of our issues associated with human resources for the upcoming year. And then our second item will be a transportation bond update. So with that, Mayor, I think we're ready to go.
Let's go. And I did hear from Councilmember Knight. It's telling him that his password is wrong. So he's trying to figure that out. So maybe Beth could reach out to him. Thank you.
So for the first item, we have Mary Vigu from Budget and Management Services ready to kick us off this afternoon.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. As the City Manager mentioned, welcome to the first budget work session. I always like to say this is the most wonderful time of the year, so we are glad to be here today. I do want to kick it off with the first item on the agenda, which is an update on our 2017 transportation bonds. I'd like to call Kenneth Ritchie to the podium, who's going to walk through an update on where we are, what are some next steps, and how this interacts with our upcoming CIP. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Kenneth Ritchie with Engineering Services here to provide an update on the transportation bonds. So with today's presentation, we'll do an overview of our programmatic elements. We'll do a quick discussion on some current funding challenges, a projects update, and then a funding status where we'll discuss a projected funding gap on the bond projects. So a discussion of our programmatic elements. This is a listing of the program areas that have been specified within the bond packages. These areas don't have specific projects that are denoted with the bonds, but are more of a bucket of funds to be used for these specific purposes. Here, this kind of shows you what the utilization is as of today with regards to some of this funding. To note, the Complete Streets is one of the newer program areas that Council created with the FY22 budget. Those first projects are in the process of working through design, and we look to deliver those early next year. There will be three program areas that on the subsequent slides I'll go into a little bit more detail on, which would be the corridor sidewalk improvements, the neighborhood sidewalk petitions, and the street improvement petitions. A couple of areas of note with regards to the uncommitted funding, the Wake Transit Plan project participation bucket, that funding is potentially being looked at for use for supporting efforts with the delivery of the New Bern BRT. And then the NCDOT project partnerships, that funding, we are anticipating some invoices coming from NCDOT where some or all of that may be used moving forward. So this is an update on our corridor sidewalks. From the last time that we updated Council, we have completed Centennial Parkway, Raleigh Boulevard, Lake Boone Trail, and Holston Lane. The Lewisburg Road sidewalk, that project has been bid, and we're anticipating that bid award being in front of Council on the March 1st agenda. The last groupings of projects, we are looking at those going to bid here this spring with delivery next summer. The petition sidewalk program, one thing to reinforce for the Council, the petition programs, the sidewalks and streets, through the guidance of Council, have been suspended due to unfunded commitments that have been made. That area is kind of highlighted with this last grouping of Valley, Inglewood, Colleton, Cobblestone, Rembert, and Brookhaven. This is an unfunded grouping of petition sidewalks with an estimated value of about $3 million to complete. I do want to take an opportunity to highlight the successes we've had with the petition sidewalk program over the last year, moving 6 of the projects through to construction completion, and we have another grouping of 6 to 7 projects that we're looking to start construction on here in the next couple of months. And then this is a highlight of our street petition program. This is a program much like the sidewalk program that does have a group of unfunded projects. That is Aberdeen, Granville, and Carolina Avenue. We are estimating about $7.7 million to complete those projects that we do not have funding for currently. So some of the project cost challenges that we're running into, which have led to the projected gap on the bond projects. So there's really kind of 3 big pieces that we're working through and trying to really get our hands around. The current real estate market, as has been very notable, the real estate market has been very hot in this area, and certainly that has led to higher projected cost values for us to acquire the property necessary to support the delivery of our projects. The construction market, materials, we have seen an increase in materials. The price of oil has gone up, price of steel. Also, we're seeing some challenges with regards to delivery of some of these materials, which has impacted some schedules and in some regards has led to higher costs. And then the labor market. Not only are we seeing increases in costs with regards to construction labor, we're also starting to see increases in costs with regards to our consultant services, our professional services labor, that is starting to impact how far our budgets will stretch. So now we'll provide an update on the projects. So this slide it shows a grouping of our completed projects. Most notably, I want to highlight with this group the Gorman Street Connector and the Jaguar Park Drive multi-purpose path and street resurfacing that were completed earlier or late last year. From a modified delivery standpoint, these are projects where we have found partners that have worked with us to deliver these. The New Bern Avenue improvements, that was a sidewalk improvements project that is being delivered as part of the BRT. Rock Quarry Road A is being delivered through a partnership with NCDOT. And the Rosengarten Alley project, that was a project that was actually completed as part of a private development project, the West Cabarrus Street development at the corner of Cabarrus and West Street. And then just to highlight, there were 2 projects that council deferred with the FY21 budget. That was the Peace Street West Streetscape project and the Leesville Road B project. And these are just some pictures of those most recent projects. Jaguar Park Drive in your top left, with a street resurfacing and a 10-foot multi-use path. This connects Athens Drive down to the Thomas Crowder Woodland Center. And then the bottom right, this is the Gorman Street Connector. So this was one of the first deliveries of a 2-way cycle track in Raleigh, and this connects from Sullivan Avenue down to Hillsborough Street and to the Greenway. So the next grouping of projects are projects that are currently under construction or into the bidding phase. I do want to highlight that Yonkers Road and Tryon Road Part C are both projects that we'll be completing here in the next few months. The Leesville Safe Routes to School likely will be not too far behind that from a completion standpoint. Pool Road and Atlantic Avenue. Pool Road has commenced construction. We anticipate Atlantic starting construction in March. The Oberlin Road Streetscape and the Blue Ridge Road Bridge Improvements projects, both of those are in the bidding phase, and we'll look for those bid awards to be coming to council this spring. So this next group is our projects that are in property acquisition. That is the Blue Ridge Road South and the Blue Ridge Road North improvements. I do want to highlight that Blue Ridge Road was originally a single project. With the noted project funding gap, staff did identify the opportunity to apply for LAP grant funding through CAMPO for the northern portion of the Blue Ridge Road project. That would be from Homewood Banks to Crabtree Valley Avenue. With that part of the project, there is a grade-separated greenway trail crossing for House Creek Greenway that is part of that grant-funded portion. The Old Lake Forest Dixie Forest Roads project is currently in property acquisition. Barwell Road and Carolina Pines. And then the last grouping is those projects that are in pre-acquisition. And we group these projects specifically to kind of show that these are the projects that have some of the least financial risk in terms of if there are considerations that have to be made to try and close the projected gap. These projects are only in design. The only funding that we have encumbered with these at this point would be design funding. That is the Lumley Westgate corridor improvements, the Marsh Creek Road, Trawick Road improvement project, the Blunt Person two-way conversion, Six Forks Road, and the West Street Extension South design. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on those projects here in just a few minutes. And so this is a summary of the remaining bond projects. And so the projected gap is about $19 million, and this is for all projects which construction bid has not yet been awarded. Most notably of these, you will notice the Marsh Creek, Trawick, and the Six Forks Road improvement projects with some of the larger budget gaps that we'll discuss in a little bit more detail here in a minute. So with the projected gap, staff has started taking a look at some initial recommendations to try and close that gap. One of those first is to reallocate all non-design funding for the West Street Extension South project. This would have approximately a $4.5 million savings, that is already factored into the $19 million that was shown previously. This project has the $10 million that the bond appropriated for this was for design and for a funding match for grant funding for construction and right-of-way acquisition. There have been some efforts to try and acquire grants to move this project forward into right-of-way and construction. There has not been any success to this point in terms of identifying a funding source for construction. And so the recommendation would be to restore that funding grant match for property acquisition and construction with the next bond. The other would be the Blunt Street, Person Street two-way conversion project. This was a project that was rescoped this time last year based off some initial feedback we had gotten and really some considerations with regards to the overlap between the Blunt Street, Person Street and the BRT projects. Based off some feedback that we have gotten through public outreach and coordination with partners, especially at NCDOT, staff would recommend a further limiting the scope to really focus on the automotive way roundabout, looking at some traffic calming opportunities throughout the corridor, and doing some limited bicycle infrastructure enhancements, such as some more bike box delivery that was delivered with the first phase of the project. And this is based off of feedback we've gotten from NCDOT with regards to maintenance of the corridor. It has been made known by them that with a potential conversion to two-way, they would look at the city for taking maintenance responsibility for both these corridors. The parking impacts has become a point of significant feedback from the community as we have done more recent outreach. As the design has moved forward, there is a significant projected parking loss because of the implementation of the protected bike facilities along this corridor. One of the overwhelming concerns we heard throughout the corridor was speeding concerns, which is why we would recommend looking at some ways to try and provide some traffic calming and some speed mitigation. And then certainly the ongoing BRT coordination throughout this corridor. So what are some other considerations for closing the remaining gap? To address the remaining projected funding gap for the bond projects, the following can be considered. And it would be a rescoping and or deferral of projects that are at the pre-property acquisition phase. And that would be the Lumley Westgate, the Marsh Creek and Trawick Roads, Six Forks Road, the West Street South, and the Blunt Street, Person Street two-way conversion project. And we'll walk through each of those at a little bit of detail on the forthcoming slides to kind of show what those options may mean from a savings standpoint. So with the Lumley Westgate Ebenezer Church Road project, this project was previously rescoped from a Lumley Westgate Ebenezer Church project with a focus now on the delivery of enhanced bicycle facilities between Westgate and Umstead Park along Ebenezer Church. Currently, that project does project about a $900,000 gap. One option to be considered could be a completion of the design but deferring acquisition and construction, which would free up about $1.9 million in bond funding. Marsh Creek Road and Trawick Road, the budget for this project is about $13.7 million. The estimated cost right now is about $19.5 million with an estimated gap of about $5.8 million. Some options that could be considered would be a rescoping of the project to defer construction either east or west of the Marsh Creek and Trawick Road intersection. It would be important to note that with the Trawick Road section of this, with the culvert, we are partnering with our counterparts in stormwater to not only look at a replacement of that culvert as part of this project, but also to make sure that that culvert is sized appropriately based off the watershed master planning that's occurring in that area. Both of those projects house about the same cost, and with that, it would free up about $2 million to transfer to close the gap. Or another option to consider could be a design completion but deferral of acquisition and construction, which would free up about $12.1 million in bond funding. The next project is our Six Forks Road Improvement Project. The budget for this one is about $31.3 million. Our estimated cost is $46.7 million. This project does span from Rowan Street to Lynn Road along the Six Forks Road corridor. The estimated gap right now is about $15.4 million. Some considerations for rescoping of this project could be to defer construction north of Millbrook Road. This does not close the gap completely on this project, but does significantly reduce the gap on this project. Another option to consider could be to complete design and acquisition, but defer construction. That would free up about $11.8 million. One thing to consider with potential deferral of this project would be there are an anticipated number of potential total take properties that likely we would want to look at some sort of early acquisition on, just to try and get those while we can. The other option would be to only complete design, but defer acquisition and construction to a future bond, and that would free up about $28.1 million in bond funding. The blunt person two-way conversion, as was discussed on the initial recommendations, with the current rescoping that was done in 2021, there is about $1.5 million of bond funding that is available to be transferred, sans any further rescoping. With the proposed rescoping of the automotive way roundabout, traffic calming, and the bicycle enhancements, that would free up about another $1.9 million for a total of $3.4. Another consideration could be to rescope to just the automotive way roundabout. With the 2017 bond, the automotive way roundabout was a separate project that was combined with the two-way conversion project for delivery. And a final option for that could be to defer this project to a future bond, allow BRT to come on board, assess traffic operations, and then look at future plans for how we could improve the corridor, and that would free up about $12.7 million. So considerations for the remaining gap, as we just highlighted, there could be rescoping or deferral of projects that are at that pre-property acquisition stage. Another option could be a reallocation of programmatic funding, or the potential use of general fund or other funding contributions. So today, we would solicit some feedback as to what priorities staff should consider in bringing forward recommendations to close the funding gap, which we would bring back as part of the CIP presentation at the April budget work session. And that is all we have from a presentation standpoint, but we will gladly take any questions.
Councilmember Branch?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Couple questions. The first one is as far as the estimated delivery for the modified projects. Do we know the delivery dates for those projects?
I'm sorry, council member, you were breaking up.
I'm sorry. For the projects that have a modified delivery, do we know the delivery dates for those projects?
So the Rosengarten Alley project is complete. That was completed earlier, I guess late last year, early this calendar year. The Newbern Avenue improvements, that was the sidewalk improvements project that was between Raleigh Boulevard and downtown. That will be delivered as part of the BRT, which I believe we're still looking at real estate commencing here in the next month or so, and we're trying to look at that starting construction late this calendar year. And the Rock Quarry Road A project, that's part of the ongoing project with NCDOT. I don't know what the exact timing on that is, but certainly we can get that information and follow up with you on that.
Okay. As we talked about the projects and making changes, have we looked into the impact of utilities and the impact of getting utilities moved? Because I've noticed this has delayed some projects already.
So utility relocation has certainly become an important factor in the projects. We do work closely with Duke Energy on those. There is cost that's borne in that, and that cost has increased over the course of time. But to say that is the strongest factor that has created this gap, I don't think that would be the case.
Okay, but it is one of the factors. I guess that's my main point.
Yes.
Okay. And lastly, Person and Blunt. I understand the need to want to delay. For me, especially with BRT, not completely figured out going south as well as west, which I believe they will be using Person and Blunt. I'm kind of okay with us delaying that part. As far as that roundabout, that's on the northern part of Person and Blunt. That's something that I know is dearly needed at that intersection because we've had a number of challenges there. So I would like to see that part completed and continue to work with the residents of the southern arm of the project that has not been converted yet.
Well, Councilmember Branch, my feedback is going to be a little different than yours. I've been working on this Blount Street, Person Street project since 2007. So this just keeps getting more and more frustrating because we just keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off.
I'm sorry.
And I would like to see some more solutions coming forward than just let's cut this and wait. I understand BRT. I understand that there have been some discussions with the Person Street businesses about a loss of parking. But if we want to create safer streets, part of the way of doing that is converting these one-way streets to two-way, creating bike lanes, making it more pedestrian friendly. And if we say this is a priority, since 2007, so I'm frustrated right now.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I understand your frustration, but these streets have already been, I say, put on somewhat of a diet. And with BRT coming through and BRT needing a dedicated lane, we're talking about using the same streets. So to go in and make a change now, to come back and make a different change, a year or 2 years from now, that's where I'm trying to balance the use of those dollars. Because the BRT is going to change it. BRT is supposed to have a dedicated lane.
Yes,
So,
and so I'm asking, why can't we design that now instead of just saying, let's put it off? And so that's some more of the detail I would like to see. If we're coordinating and we're looking at this holistically, why can't we do the planning for that now, as opposed to, like I said, putting it off? And then we have Six Forks Road, and that's been another source for many years, trying to move forward on that. I understand the redesign, but there's a lot of projects going up in that area, and I think that we have to make that a priority as well. I saw, let me see, some hands raised, Councilmember Melton, Buffkin, and then Cox. You're muted.
You can hear me now?
Yes, that happens the first time you go to speak at every meeting.
Every time, I know. Well, thankfully, we're going back in person soon. This was a lot of information to absorb, and it's tough to have these discussions because some of these are projects that have been promised for a really long time. I think all of them would probably do a lot of good in the communities that they're intended to serve. I wish we had better solutions, and maybe we do need to get a little more creative on some of these. Um, I get frustrated when I hear comments about removing on-street parking for bike lanes. I think there's a lot of data showing that the bike lanes actually increase foot traffic and business patrons to businesses. And so maybe if we could do a little more, maybe education or information to some of the small businesses who are concerned. I think there's a lot of really good examples to some other cities where the businesses were initially hesitant and the bike lanes actually increased the number of people coming to shop there. And so that may be one solution for that piece. I'd like more information on the West Street extension. I think that that tunnel is really important because as the city continues to grow in all directions, that is a corridor that really is going to link so many places together. It's a greenway connection, it's a cycle track connection, and it gets people over to Dix and over towards the downtown South area, all the way up north. And so I know it wasn't a big part of this presentation, but if we can get maybe some backup material about the scope and the projected timeline and what we may be able to do to help with funding. I know you mentioned we've tried grants, so I think that's a really important one because there's literally a brick wall that blocks connection on that one. So all these other ones we're talking about, to go from 2 lanes to 1 lane, at least people can get there, but there's literally a brick wall blocking West Street right now. And so that seems to me to be a priority. I would also just say that the Peace Street, the second piece of it that we deferred last year, I know folks are really want some answers on that. And even if it's not something we can do now, if we can give a timeline or come up with a plan, or if there's some interim solution, I think that would be really important as well. But I would like some more time to go over this to give more feedback.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. And council members, I'm struggling to find words that would be appropriate for this forum. Golly, I feel like somebody just kicked my dog. And I'm talking, of course, about the Six Forks Road project that has been under consideration for as long as I can remember. And I'm really disappointed, and I find none of these options to be acceptable. And the question from the staff was, what priorities should staff be looking at? The priority should be getting our projects done, and to do that, we got to find new money. And and I'm trying not to be centered solely on my district, but the Six Forks Road project is the largest funding gap, and all the projects are important to every part of the city. I know that. But we have just got to find some new money and get this Six Forks Road project done and get as much of the other projects done as we possibly can. And I am open to anything that achieves that goal. If we have to do a transit bond this year, we have to do look at 2/3 bonds. If we have to find some other way to finance it, I mean, this is not acceptable. We've got to get this project done. And we got to keep moving ahead on all the other projects. So I started to repeat myself, but gosh, this is disappointing news.
Councilmember Cox.
The bond is obviously the preferred approach to funding these projects. When can we reasonably expect another transportation bond? And a second part to my question is, in the time frame between now and the next transportation bond, how much of these projects could we move forward? You're muted. You're muted.
Bond, am I here?
Okay,
Sorry.
okay now.
In terms of the next transportation bond, council member, we're still working on what that would look like. And that's part of what we're hoping to bring back in April in terms of where we are with transportation with the 2017 and how we could potentially do a bond next year for transportation based on their needs. So Kenneth could talk maybe more about timing of that, but I would imagine if we move forward with some of those projects in terms of design or land acquisition with a bond next year with transportation, we might be able to move some of them forward still in a timely manner. And that's all up to council's priorities and where they are at. But part of what we were hoping to bring back in April with the CIP was what those transportation needs are. Because now that 2017 funds have been spent, there are additional needs that continue to grow. And so we will need another bond coming up. And so we're going to put that on the table in April as something to look forward to next year.
So is it safe to say that it's premature to say that we're going to defer these projects until we understand when the next bond would be able to be approved, and then we might have the money so that these projects do not get derailed?
Potentially. I mean, depending on if we roll out if council supports a bond done next year, we could close that gap through that process and maybe use the 2017 that has been mentioned to do some of that beginning work in terms of finishing design or land acquisition. But we would need to look at each of those projects.
Yeah, for example, like the Marsh Creek and Trawick, which is in my district, it says that if we complete the design but defer acquisition and construction, we would have 12.1 million available for transfer. But so my question is, what if we just continue to move forward? How long would it take to complete the design? And then also, how long would it take to complete acquisition? And in that amount of time, will we actually be at a point where we're ready to approve the next bond? And if that's the case, then we really don't have to defer that project, at least not significantly. So I was wondering if staff could do that kind of analysis for each of these projects.
Yes, council member, we can do that. Just a little bit of, I guess, of a schedule for the Marsh Creek Trawick project. We are looking at trying to complete design and acquisition late this year, and that would have been the original schedule, not anticipating any funding challenges.
Okay, so it could take another considerable amount of time to complete the acquisition, and then by that time we might be well underway in terms of crafting the next transportation bond.
Yes, potentially.
Yeah, so my impression is it's not really doom and gloom. It's a question of timing, and you know, and the big question is when can we expect the next transportation bond, and then we can plug into that transportation bond enough money to cover these gaps.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a question to a follow-up. Now that we've moved our elections to even years, putting a bond on the ballot in an odd year election seems problematic to me. So has staff discussed that? We don't have a normal election scheduled. We would have to, that would cost money, but also getting people out to vote. The polling would be difficult at best to predict because we don't know who's going to come out. So I'm wondering if that's a realistic solution. Has that been discussed at all?
Yes, ma'am. I would say if Mary stepped to the mic, but before she gets back to the mic, I think when we come back in April, where we have then taken a comprehensive look at all of the requests and where we are positioned with ARPA funding and what our upcoming proposed budget for FY23 looks like, we will be in a better position. I think what staff was looking for today was a little bit of guidance into what were the priorities of council so that we could then go back and plug in some of those priorities and then work around to figure out the funding sources. So when we come back in April, we will have some alternatives as to how we can stand up some of these projects. And quite frankly, when you're looking at property acquisition and some of that, it takes several months. So by the time we would get to a referendum in 24, we would be well set up through design and acquisition to be ready to go to construction at that point.
Who is our point person dealing with the feds on infrastructure grant funding?
I'm sorry, Mayor, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear part of it.
Who is our point person for dealing with USDOT on potential funding for these projects? I know they're going to release a lot of grants that municipalities can apply for. I'm wondering how we're tracking that, who's talking to who's in charge.
I'm going to ask Michael Moore from Transportation to come up and answer that. I know our staff, as we work through ARPA and some of the others, is monitoring the grants as the federal government releases them, but he might have more specific information.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Michael Moore with Transportation. We are following what monies are available and what can come to us via the grants. In the new federal program, because of the nature of some of these streets being more local streets, they're probably not going to be eligible. Some of the others will, and we're going to continue to pursue those. I think you heard Mr. Ritchie talk about the grant funding for West Street. We've applied for whatever versions of Tiger there are. They call them different things. They're different bills, but we've done that twice and been unsuccessful. That does not mean we're going to stop, and we actually have some time scheduled to go through our review of our last application that's coming up in a month or so just to see where we can improve on that. But we are pursuing grants very aggressively. Mr. Ritchie also mentioned how we were able to help close the gap on the Blue Ridge project by getting some local lap funding. We're going to look and see what we can do through that process as well for maybe to help supplement this on some of the other projects. So we are very aggressive about that. We are trying to follow very closely what bills come available to us and what kind of eligibility we have for those particular funding sources.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Branch, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I had a question in that vein around the ARPA funding as well as the infrastructure bond that was passed by the federal government are as far as being options. I think the key for me is that even if we hold a project for construction, we need to be shovel ready. So that means I really feel design and acquisitions for all of these need to move forward so that when the money is available for construction, you never know what the federal government may do, on any given day or even the state. So we need to have projects that are ready to move forward. So where are we with possibly, I think from what I've heard, you're going to come back and let us know what ARPA funding options may be available, as well as any infrastructure funding.
That is correct, Councilmember Branch.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, thank you. Appreciate the report and what you be looking forward to what you bring back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, City Manager.
Yes, ma'am. So the next item is an HR benefits and all things HR update. So we will have a tag team this afternoon. We'll have Mary Viggy from the Office of Budget and Management Services, followed by Fagan Stackhouse from HR, and then back to Mayor to close it out.
Good afternoon again, Mayor and members of council. I'm Mary Viggy, Budget Management Services. As the city manager mentioned, today we are going to go over some of our HR updates as we go into the fiscal year 23 budget development process. And so Fagan Stackhouse and I, the HR director, will walk through several items. The first will be a look at our temporary and permanent part-time study. We'll provide an update on that and the next steps. An update on our public safety pay issues, specifically surrounding recruitment and retention and starting salaries. And then lastly, we'll look at employee benefits and compensation and provide an update for council on that as we move into the budget process. So I'd like to begin today with the temporary and permanent part-time employee study. And so this was actually originally pulled forward as part of the implementation of the compensation study, which has been about 4 or 5 years ago, the next step in that recommendation. We as a city have over 3,000 temporary employees. Those are mostly located in parks, recreation, and cultural resources, along with our Raleigh Convention Center and Performing Art Complex. We have not reviewed our temporary jobs since 2008, and as many are aware, our current temporary pay is not competitive in our market. There's another issue out there is based on federal guidelines and employment guidelines. There really is a need to establish the difference between a permanent part-time employee and a temporary in terms of that 1,000-hour rule and what kicks in with our state retirement versus when as an organization we need to offer temporary employees retirement. We all are aware that recruitment and retention have been a challenge, which has impacted our service delivery to our community. So what do we do? Staff worked to define the difference between what would be a permanent part-time and a temporary position. We took that and benchmarked with our peers on where they were with temporary and permanent part-time as it related to compensation, benefits, how they calculated hours, and so on. HR worked with departments to slot our permanent part-time, and that's what that PPT means, to comparable FTE classification. So looking at a full-time equivalent and what work they do, and that a part-time does that same job, just at reduced hours. And so, and potentially maybe less responsibility in some ways, but what would that comparative part-time rate be? And so we slotted all of those employees. We did ask departments who are requesting permanent part-time employees to submit business cases, understanding that these potentially are going to cost the organization more, have a greater impact and be a great benefit, but also through the, providing benefits and those things to employees is an associated cost. And so we asked for business justification. Working with HR, my office reviewed those, met with departments, understood those justifications on service demands, and as they were slotted accordingly, move them forward. Based on this work, we as an organization are defining a temporary employee as one that works less than 999 hours in a 12-month period. Our temporary positions do not increase our FTE count, so they're not counted towards those full-time equivalents. They help us in delivering those core services to the community, but at the same time, they provide great flexibility to our departments. And so if you've ever worked with Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, they depend on their temporary employees to help them, specifically in the areas of that flexibility with scheduling and hours and the work that they do. So as part of that proposal, coming out of this, we currently are proposing that temporary minimal hourly rate move from $8.25 an hour to $11 an hour beginning in fiscal year 23. Now, recognizing in order to avoid compression, we also slotted other temporaries in a sliding scale upward. And so all of the various pays will move upward as a result of this as well in our temporary classification. In terms of permanent part-time, we're defining it as employees who are working either 20, 25, or 30 hours a week, and those are in a permanent budgeted position. Those would count towards our FTE count as an organization. It provides some standardization and some ongoing consistency across the organization. Part-time employees would be contributing to the elders along with the city, so to our state retirement system. And then as part of this process, we took to the benefits committee a discussion and asked for a recommendation regarding what health insurance we would want to offer our permanent part-time employees. And so the benefits committee recommend providing 30-hour-a-week part-time permanent employees with employee-owned Plan B healthcare coverage at a cost of $25 per month. And I will tell you that based on the benchmarking information, that is highly competitive, and that's assuming as long as the employee stays compliant with the city requirements in terms of our wellness and smoking cessation. So that's the proposal right now. So we've already talked about it a little bit in terms of what are those benefits. And so those permanent part-times will allow us to increase the stability of service delivery. Working with the departments, we believe it will improve our recruitment and retention, especially as we are in this hard job market right now, which is going to allow us to maintain and enhance our programming and services. And you can see from this chart on the slide where those positions are. The majority of them are in our Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resource Department. You can see there's some scattered over at the Performing Arts Center, even in our HR department, along with transportation. Some of the estimated cost impact that we are looking to budget for in our fiscal year 23 budget. So for temporary, it's that raise from the minimum of $8.25 an hour to $11 an hour. It's a total cost of $3,220,000. Sorry. Directly to the general fund, it's about $3.2 million. In terms of that part-time conversion, it's about a cost to the general fund of $1.6 million. And so when we think about the general fund, it would be an estimated impact of about $5 million for fiscal year 23. I'm going to turn it over now to Fagan Stackhouse to talk to you about our fire and police sworn pay plan adjustments.
Thank you, Ms. Big U. Again, Fagan Stackhouse, Human Resources. And looking at the fire and police sworn pay plan adjustments, we want to cover the background, a little bit of history on what has been happening, the market comparison, recommendations, and looking at what we would be proposing in terms of pay plans and the estimated costs, and then look at some police incentives. We are already beginning to promote some of these incentives to retain and attract police officers. So as we look at this, we are concerned certainly with the competitive pay that's occurring here in the local market. A lot of activity has occurred with the Wake County municipalities, and so we have taken a real close look at that. But traditionally and historically, what has happened is that fire and police, we looked at the major cities across North Carolina and counties, and so we had a philosophy that if they moved, they moved because of what was happening in the market in terms of them being 10% below the average of that market. But the local market certainly has been compelling, and so we continue to look at the larger cities in Nashville, Charlotte, Greensboro, Durham, Fayetteville, Winston-Salem. But the focus and emphasis has been to study what's been happening in the local market and provide some recommendations. We also looked at the experience that we are having, as well as comparing nationwide with the challenge of recruiting and retaining well-qualified police officers. And we did some benchmarking in terms of what might be appropriate. So we are looking at some of the incentives that we have compared ourselves to out there and what might work best for the city of Raleigh. This is the data that we pulled together, and we did it based on benchmarks. We have several benchmarks for the police department and also for the fire department. And we did an average of all of the municipalities in Wake County. Some are very high, some are very low, but the average. And we found ourselves being a little bit low in terms of where these benchmarks are compared to other benchmarks that we matched up with. And so this gives you an indication of where we are at this point in time. And that leads us to, let me just back up here. And that leads us to this particular chart here, the data that was compiled and where we are. As you look at the current slide here, it should show that we are at 200,000 for a firefighter and 63,377. That is low, and yeah, there's something happening with the slide projection. But at any rate, here we have the current and the proposed. What we're proposing here is that firefighters and senior firefighters and lieutenants and deputy marshals, their minimums would be raised competitively. And those minimums would be raised competitively as well as the maximums. And we think that this is going to be a really significant change for them, as well as the senior firefighter, the lieutenant, and the deputy fire marshal. As we looked at that, we discovered that the average, we wanted to be better than that. We wanted to be 5% better than that. So what these proposed ranges are reflecting is at least that 5% better than the average in the market that we are comparing ourselves to locally. With a captain, and I just want to go through these in a little bit of detail. The captain is adequate and competitive with the $74,535, but we decided that the maximum was not competitive sufficiently enough, so we adjusted that particular range. And those above the captain, we adjusted all the minimums. And we found that there were 4 employees only that were not making at least the minimum of what we were proposing for the minimums for the ranges up through the assistant fire chief. And the maximums are in really good shape competitively. So that represents the proposed fire plan. And then the next is the police pay plan, which the minimums, we did the same thing for these ranks for the police officer, senior police officer, detective, and the minimum adjustments, we made them very competitive using that formula. We also did the same thing with the maximums, and the maximums are now very competitive in the local market. The sergeant, the minimum pay is very competitive. We did adjust the maximum for that level. And then for the lieutenants, captains, majors, and deputy chiefs, we again raised those minimums up, and they are competitive. Found absolutely no one in those ranks that were not at least at the minimum or greater. So we feel that is a pretty good structure. The maximums we felt were very well structured and competitive, and would not be recommending any adjustments whatsoever for the maximum of those particular ranges. So here we have Wake County's average plus a 5% increase that I just talked about. The estimated cost is based on the implementation in conjunction with the annual merits. We would look at making these adjustments around the 1st of August, and the estimated cost for that would be about $400,000. There's 92 employees that would be impacted based on bringing up to the minimum, so adjusting the maximum, moving people appropriately where they should be placed at about $510,000. Then we have about 120 employees there in the fire department, and that cost would be somewhere around $502,000. And the total would be about $1.4 million, 212 employees. And we think this would be a very competitive structure. It could change just a little bit between the time that we implement and as we're discussing here today. So that gives us a bit of a snapshot in terms of where we are. And the other piece that I wanted to talk about just briefly is on the 4 incentives that we're beginning to work with Chief Patterson and her staff on in the police department. The referral incentive program for the police department would provide for those employees who are in the police department, be they sworn or civilian, to recommend persons and refer them. And the way this plan works is they refer a person, they get into the academy, get the first $2,500, they successfully complete the work in the academy, they're sworn, and taking the oath, they would get the other $2,500. And the annual cost for that would run somewhere in the neighborhood of about $350,000. The bonus incentive for the lateral hires, these are people that are already trained. They could have the basic law enforcement training, and that would be somewhere in North Carolina or across the country. And so we could bring people in that have the basic law enforcement training. The other part to this is that you can bring in North Carolina someone who has less than a year, and that would be $2,500, and greater than a year, $5,000. Outside of North Carolina, we'd have a similar type of package. For those that less than 2 years, $2,500. Those that have greater than 2 years, $5,000. We think that is competitive as we compared ourselves and benchmarked ourselves with others around the country. What that would cost us is an estimated $150,000. And then we looked at our field training officers. And I look at field training officers similar to what a good teacher can do. They produce good students. So the good training officers will make sure that we have really well-trained and very good police officers. So we'd increase the stipend from 3% to 5% and include also the animal control officers. And that would cost an estimated $65,000. And these estimations are coming from the police department. We would also offer that fourth incentive, which would be the second language fluency, provide 5% pay incentive for officers to learn a second language. They would have to pass this test annually and apply it in their daily jobs. Then we would also look at the sign language, and the Spanish would be what we place our emphasis on initially, and then the sign language would also be something that we would want some of the officers to take on, and they would also receive the 5% incentive. The annual estimated cost there would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $42,300. So Mayor's going to come back up and kind of give a summary of some of these, as well as talk about the compensation and benefits.
Thank you. So the next section, we're going to talk a little bit more about employee benefits and overall compensation as we look at the fiscal year 23 budget and its process. Did want to start with a reminder as we think about employee benefits and compensation that it's more than just about the paycheck and those pieces, but that the city of Raleigh has a comprehensive employee package. And so we've shown this or shared this slide previously, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but as you can see, we offer a variety of programs and incentives for employees currently, everything from life insurance to retirement to tuition assistance, our employee assistant program. And so just as a reminder in terms of what that total compensation looks like, you have our contribution to the state retirement system, our medical, dental, and life, that depending on the plan that an employee picks up, that the city's contribution ranges anywhere from that $6,000 to $35,000 a year at a cost per the city. Other compensation includes all of the holidays, days off, our overtime, benefits. Other benefits include training and those pieces. We shared this last fall with City Council in a prior presentation and just wanted to put it here as a reminder in terms of what are some of those examples of what our total compensation looks like. And you can see we have 4 examples from a police officer to a code compliance officer. You can see the amounts on the bottom vary, but we looked at some specific areas of not just salary, but what is that retirement contribution? What are those other compensations, including that holiday pay, overtime, and those pieces? And then that impact on insurance. And this is based on a Plan B family with dental and dental core. And so you can see those there. And just wanted to do that as a reminder as I began to talk about our benefits for the upcoming fiscal year. So as we're all aware, health insurance is the most expensive benefit for our organization. We are a third-party claims administrator, provides that medical management services for us, and pay medical and prescription drug claims. You can see on the screen our providers include Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, Prime Therapeutics, and Delta Dental. We are self-insured, and so we are responsible for all claims up to $375,000. We, as a city, offer 2 plans currently, Plan A, which is a higher premium, lower out-of-pocket, and a Plan B, which is that reduced premium, higher out-of-pocket. As a reminder, our Plan B does have a zero cost to an employee option, which we've had for many years, and a majority of our employees take advantage of it. In terms of dental, we have a core basic plan, and we also provide or offer an enhanced plan at a charge to employees. As we thought about our overall compensation this year, specifically when we looked at the public safety pay issues and part-time and some of the others, we really wanted to take a quick snapshot of our health insurance and how we compared to others. And so one of the things we did as part of this process was review benchmarking data from Wake County municipalities. We reviewed everything from monthly premiums to deductibles to out-of-pocket maximums, recognizing that it is very difficult to benchmark benefits, just basically just looking at them due to plan specifics. While we might offer one benefit, in terms of what a surgery type, another municipality may not. And we didn't get into all of that. So this is very high-level comparison. We currently do have an RFP out for overall comprehensive evaluation of our city benefits program. And we'll be bringing that back to City Council as part of the fiscal year 24 budget process. So what did that benchmarking tell us? That 9 out of the 10 benchmark cities in Wake County have a free employee-only plan. However, those deductibles range from $1,500 to $5,000 for in-network, while Raleigh's, and this is all based on what would be comparable to our Plan B, our Raleigh plan is $500. And so you can see, based on that high-level comparison, that we are competitive. Co-pays from our benchmarks ranged from $20 to $50 for primary care visits. Raleigh currently sits at $20. And then for urgent care, it ranged from $25 to $50. And ours is currently at $40. And so based on this data and some others, we are currently highly competitive in terms of the area of health insurance with our peers in the local market. 5 cities use financial incentives or penalties to encourage employees to participate in health and or wellness screenings, which is very similar to what we do. So we found that out as well. In terms of fiscal year 23, a reminder that our health insurance runs on a calendar year. And so these rates would become effective as January 1st, 2023. For fiscal year 23, we are proposing no increase to monthly premiums for our employees. And so what that means is this would be the second year in a row that we would hold that flat to what an employee currently pays. And so no increase to our non-compliant rates and no increase to our dentals. And some of that is because we have been able through other areas in terms of managing our health initiatives. And so really doing that through our wellness programs and those things. And so we've really been able to try to control cost and make it manageable for employees. So this chart just highlights, and as a reminder, those are not going up, but what our active compliant rates are. And this is based on an employee who is compliant and who has completed our wellness and our smoking requirements. So our current compliance program for our health insurance, to be eligible for our compliant rate, an employee, retirees, and covered spouses must complete an annual wellness assessment, which includes that health risk assessment and a biometric screening. And they must submit a non-tobacco use attestation or participate in a cessation program. In each instance of this noncompliance, it does result in a $50 per month rate added to their base premium. And so this is our current compliance program for employees. We have been asked about a COVID vaccination compliance program, and so based on where we are with our other compliance, we would propose the following: that to be eligible for our wellness compliant premium rate, that an employee, retiree, and covered spouses must demonstrate proof of being fully vaccinated prior to August 1st. And so remember, we run on a calendar year, and the fall is when we do signups for benefits. And so this would give employees time to become compliant before they have to sign up for their next round of benefits. This would be based on the CDC definition of what being fully vaccinated means, and so currently that does not require boosters. Each instance of this noncompliance would result in a $50 per month rate added to an employee's base premium. Working with legal and HR, we would need to look at accommodations that will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis for either medical reasons or sincerely held religious beliefs on why an employee cannot be vaccinated. So looking at employee compensation, the City of Raleigh adopted the living wage policy back in January of 2017 that applies to all of our permanent full-time employees. And so that rate, this chart highlights some of the benefits of that, and it's based on using the universal living wage calculation. And so that rate for fiscal year 2023 is going up to $37,850. And so this too will be included as part of the 23 budget. In other areas of employee compensation, HR is continuing to work on our full-time market study review. So we're reviewing 125 benchmark positions. We're using our peer market data. We're also excited to continue our work on the implementation of a new performance management system, which is in line with our merit process. And then continued review of other employee compensation issues through the budget process. And so you'll hear us talk more about this when we present the budget in May. We'll look at everything from what are merits, potential range adjustments, market adjustments, and et cetera. And so they'll all be also reviewed and included with the 23 budget. And we have a long-term commitment, and based on what we've presented today, to stay aligned with market and provide those high-quality benefits. So what are the next steps? So we will continue to work on funding options for inclusion in the fiscal year 23 budget. I mean, we're looking at everything from a potential property tax rate increase to whether or not we need to adjust some fees, specifically maybe in the area of Parks, Rec, and Cultural Resources to align with some of those increases, and then looking and identifying other revenue increases that could assist with this, and potential reallocation of current resources to cover some of this gap. As we work through the budget process, we will begin system and operational work on the implementation of this because it does take some time. And the other piece is we need to really stay competitive in the market, specifically in the area of Parks, Rec, and Cultural Resources, in thinking about our summer programs. And so we are proposing that we begin advertising our summer staff at the new rates so that they have the ability to bring staff in at those rates when summer hits. And stay competitive in that market. We want to apply the market adjustments to fire and police sworn personnel that were presented starting the first paycheck in August with the implementation of merits. And so as it was mentioned earlier, that would be a deviation from what we currently do. Merits are traditionally done later in the fall, but we would move public safety sworn personnel up to that August implementation. And that's another one that we really need to continue to stay competitive in the market. We'll continue working with the police on the implementation of their incentives, along with working with fire and our emergency communications on other potential incentives for them, knowing where the market is and helping them continue to recruit and retain their employees. We will continue, HR will continue to work with public safety departments to monitor staffing needs and make recommendations when needed. And some of that is understanding the high level of vacancies and how we move forward to continue and recruit and retain the employees that we need. We are here to answer any questions that City Council may have about any of the proposals that are on that we presented today.
Councilmember Cox.
Okay, so I understand the police department has a gap of about 150 to maybe 180 officers, and that the fire department has a gap of about 50 firefighters. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact numbers, and I don't think we have them with us. I do know it is. I don't know if it's as high as that in terms of the police department. And the other thing with that calculation, it does not include any recruit classes. So recruits are not calculated in our vacancy. So when you hear that there is 50 vacancies, for example, in the fire department, that doesn't include any we have hired for recruits, if that makes sense. So until they graduate, they don't count as technically employees with the city of Raleigh for that calculation. So it's a little misleading that we don't necessarily have 150 vacancies in the police department, because some of those employees could be in training or have graduated from the academy but still in some sort of training. So that's why some of those numbers are potentially higher. Did I get that right? Yeah.
Well, how can we get accurate information then about what the gaps are? Because in my view, this is the biggest problem with public safety, is that we have these gaps in public safety, and that affects the safety of the public, obviously. And so my question then is what you're proposing going to really help close those gaps? And because these gaps have been growing for the past few years, and I guess I need convincing that what you're proposing is really going to close the gaps, or do we need to do something more? I hear constantly that officers and firefighters are leaving for other communities, not only in North Carolina, but even out of state. And actually, your presentation actually alludes to that. So the big question in my mind is, are we really doing enough to close the gaps? Because the gaps in staffing are really a gaps in public safety, and it impacts, response times to emergencies, and it can actually affect, the lives of people that really need that help.
So I think at the basic, we can get the numbers in terms of a snapshot in time of where we are with vacancies and flush those numbers out to be more specific, that when we say police has 150 vacancies, what that number actually includes and looks at. In terms of if we're doing enough, most of this work was based on benchmarks, looking at our peers and understanding where they were and how we could stay competitive in the market. In addition, working with the police department on incentives to look at, how can we bring people in, and then how can we retain them long term. So I don't have that answer if this is the long-term solution, but I do believe it is a good first step in helping us really begin to look at how do we recruit and retain the officers that we have both in police and fire.
Well, I agree with that. And I think one of our important benchmarks going forward should be taking a look at these gaps on a quarterly basis and seeing how we're doing to close those gaps. And because I really think getting down to closing those gaps is a very important goal for the city.
Councilmember Branch?
Yes, thank you all for the presentation. For the total compensation example, is it possible you can send us an updated example with the new starting salaries?
Yeah, we can look at that. I mean, in some cases, I'm not sure it necessarily changes their salary. We'll see if it does. If not, we'll include their merits for next year. Maybe that would be, we'll look at what that impact of this would have on that employee.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. So one point of feedback on the part-time employees, I see this 5 million or so impact to the general fund. I'd encourage staff to go back and look at fees and see if we can shift that burden to fee revenue rather than general fund revenue. I hear constantly, for example, with our pools, people say, I would gladly pay more if the pool could be open when I need it. And I think likewise with our summer camps, they're a great value compared to other programs that are available in the area. And of course, we need to continue our scholarship programs and ensure people who don't have the means to pay can access those programs. But there again, I think that you would hear from a lot of parents that would say, I gladly would pay a higher fee if it meant there was more programming available. That aside, I have a few questions about police and firefighter pay. Did I understand correctly that recruits are paid at the same entry level as if they had started full-time?
Currently, they are not, but under the proposal, it would move to doing away with our current recruit classification, and they would start at the same salary as a regular officer.
Got it. Thank you. So I'll just look at fire as an example, just because I have that one on my screen, but I see the same dynamic showing up in police, so maybe it applies to both. Help me understand how people get raises within the range when they stay at the same rank. And a related question is, some of the maximums are higher than the minimums at the next level, which seems to create a disincentive to seek a promotion.
We don't have discrete ranges, and we've looked at that before in public safety, but it's somewhat cost prohibitive, or it takes the range and makes it too short. Currently, our merits for sworn personnel are based on for example, last year it was 2 or 4%. So depending on what that midpoint is, if you were below the midpoint, you receive 4%. If you were above the midpoint, you receive 2%.
Okay. So the second part, maybe I missed it, Mary. I'm sorry. So with these rankings where the maximum is higher than the minimum of the next promotion level? How do we deal with that? And
Typically, you're only reaching that maximum if you've been in that position for many, many years, right? Working through your way through the ranks. And so there are cases where you potentially could have an employee that's been with the city for 20 plus years making more than someone who is above a rank of them who has less time with the city. But that's usually that case that it's that they have been there for much longer in terms of time. Yeah.
well, okay, then a couple points of feedback that maybe you could work on for us. So I've heard from particularly from firefighters who are interested in providing an incentive for increasing education, and I didn't see anything in that here. Maybe you could help me understand today, or we could, look at some incentives um, uh, for firefighters getting more education, going back and getting new trainings, new certifications, or degrees.
That's part of the next steps that we're working on, is working with our fire and ECC in incentive programs for those areas as well.
Okay, thank you. And for the council members, if I just a brief comment, with the total price tag here of 1.4 million, I mean, that doesn't seem to hurt a whole lot, and I think we could do a little better for our first responders. So I'd be willing to go a little higher. I don't know what that means. Maybe looking at a statewide average, or looking at some peer cities across the country and making sure we're competitive nationally. Or, if we want to use the Wake County average number and go for a higher premium for folks that want to come to Raleigh, I'd be willing to look at that, because I just don't think 1.4 million is a whole lot of money in our $1 billion city budget. Thank you.
Councilmember Melton. You're muted. No sound.
Is it not working? No.
It is now.
Crap. I just hit mute again. Is it working still?
Yep.
Okay. I have a question about the proposed minimum wage rate for the part-time employees. The material says, I think it was $8.25 up to $11 an hour. There is the push for the $15 minimum wage. I know the federal government's looking at it for their employees, and I really think that we should try to be a leader here. I know we sent a minimum living wage rate for full-time employees of, I think it's like $16.40 an hour, and I'm just wondering if we can do a bit better on our temporary and part-time employees. If we're going to look at a proposed minimum hourly rate, I mean, hopefully closer to the $11 side, but I really think we need to be pushing towards 15, since I think that's the right thing to do. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, Councilmember Branch.
Yes, the question is is there a way where we can look at an opportunity for residents to support some of our programs across the entire city to help cover some of that cost? In exchange, our resources and monies that comes in will go more towards our employees' compensation. That question makes sense, Madam?
It's hard to hear you, Councilor Branch. I'm not sure. You keep going in and out.
I'll log off and come back.
Councilmember Cox.
Just to follow up on Councilmember Buffkin's question about increasing fees, I was wondering how many transactions do we actually process in the Parks Department annually?
We would need to come back with that number. It's significant, and it depends on the program type. I mean, and that is something we are looking at in terms of part of the budget process, working with them on their fees and how this change can be supported by them.
Okay, thank you.
I would just caution when you're looking at fees to please place an equity lens on that. because what is affordable for some people may not be affordable to others. But if others are willing to pay more, so everyone benefits, that would be great. But I do know even with our parks, like facilities, community centers, we have had people who can't afford to pay the cost. And I know that's how we have um, paid our operating cost in the past. But this issue came up when Mr. Hall was still here, and it was like, man, this is an equity issue that we haven't addressed. So I would just make sure that we're looking at it from that perspective as well. Councilmember Branch?
Okay, is this better?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened. So my question is there a way for us to set up a program where citizens can contribute and donate that will help cover some of our fees, where we can then leverage our fees to help with employee pay? So we're not having to use our fees for running the programs and pay. And then that way it can work equitably across the city. As when I jumped in, I think I was hearing the mayor state. So just an idea I want to put out there. Just, what can we do to allow this comes back to public-private partnerships for our programming is basically what I'm referencing.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cox?
Yeah, just to follow up on Councilmember Melton's comment about living wage, I was wondering, what is the current living wage? I thought I understood it was over $17 an hour. And what is the minimum wage, say, for our police officers and firefighters? And how does that compare with the living wage?
Let me find that slide. I'm sorry. The proposed living wage, the current living wage is $36,052. For fiscal year 23, it is $37,850. And so that would be the salary of those pieces. And then if you look at where we are in terms of police and fire starting, back in that presentation, you're fine. Help me out here, Fagan. So with currently a police officer starts at $42,300, and then the proposal though would have them move to $47,454, and then fire starts at $39,200, and the proposed would move it to $43,906. This isn't it.
Councilmember Fort?
Thank you, staff, for the presentation, and I've been listening to all of the comments from our council members. And one note, I know we've had this conversation before, and I, saw in the materials there's going to be like a benchmark study done of all of our positions across the city. But one thing I would say, I think COVID highlighted. Certainly, have a lot of respect for our first responders and know the job that they do is very important. But during COVID, we also learned that our solid waste services folks had a very special role to play. Some of our folks in the parks department who watch kids and stuff like that played a very vital role too. So I don't want the conversation to be overshadowed by pushing the narrative of we got to do more for our first responders when we had a lot of folks out on the front lines during COVID and got a good sense that a lot of the work that our staff does here is valuable. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Councilmember Fort. Very good point. Any other questions? Okay, Marshall.
So thank you, Mayor. And to Councilmember Ford, that was a very good point. That was going to be a lead into our closing comments. Today was just a first opportunity to talk to you all about where we are in our budget deliberations in looking at pay and compensation and our total rewards and benefits. And so we elevated public safety for two reasons. It is a critical core function that keeps the city safe and operating. But secondly, because there was a request for this item about 3 months ago, and we committed that we would bring it back as part of the first initial stages of our budget deliberation. So to the rest of the organization, we are looking at pay totally across the board to make sure that we stay in the market competitiveness. And quite frankly, what COVID has also shown us is that work will look different, and how people engage and interact with work will look differently as we get on the backside of this pandemic. And so what we will see in the next couple of months is some alternatives and some options of how we will be able to pay for this. So as we get into the latter part of April, early May, you will see some proposed fee alternatives. You will see some potential tax increases, and you will look at some other program adjustments that may help us pay for some of these recommendations. But we wanted to bring this forward so that we could at least be responsive and honor the commitment that we had several months ago to our public safety employees. And then secondly, kind of set the stage for the hard conversations that are going to be happening as part of this year's budget deliberations. And I will say to Councilmember Buffkin's questions, there are a couple of incentives for fire that are being considered right now, and that is additional stipend pay for our training officers, as well as some of the second language fluency pay. So pretty much in line with police incentives, but the education incentives right now across the board, the only educational incentive that exceeds the normal program through HR is in the police department.
I just want to say I really do like that second language pay idea. I think that could be highly beneficial to the city and to our residents. So thank you for that. Councilmember Cox.
Yeah, I just want to add, I was doing some calculations, and I think based on the actual additional hours that firefighters work compared to other employees, that a fair minimum salary going forward would be closer to $50,000 a year. And so I just want to throw that out.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. And I think this is probably best addressed by the city manager. I'm generally aware we're working with the county on some property tax relief measures, and I know, we're all very cognizant of the bottom line impact, and particularly the impact on residents whose property values have increased substantially. City manager, could you maybe give us an update on the state of those conversations? Bearing in mind, 2/3 of the tax burden in this county, in this city rather, is on the county side. So we need the county's help if we're going to provide that relief. But could you help us out with that, city manager?
Absolutely. Those conversations are ongoing with Wake County, and we are in the preliminary stages of standing up a program that will meet the needs of those that are most challenged in our community to be able to meet their tax obligations. Those programs obviously come with some guidelines that we need to be good fiscal stewards to make sure that we're not creating additional burdens on other taxpayers in our system as well. So we hope by the time we get ready to roll out the proposed budget, we will have accommodations in that budget that will address what a program would look like in FY23 to add some relief and assistance to people that are struggling with their property taxes.
Okay, thank you.
And the other side of that equation too is internally, we are very in tune to the fact that we are trying to be mindful that we're not adding to the tax burden also with additional programs and obligations as well.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? City manager, we're good?
We are good. So the work is hard, the work is ongoing, and we look forward to our next budget work session.
Okay, when is that going to be?
It is in March. I don't have the date. Mary Viggy can tell you the exact date.
Is scheduled for March. The next work session is scheduled for March 14th. That is where we'll bring the enterprise funds back. So you'll hear from Raleigh Water, Stormwater, Solid Waste, and we typically talk about their fees and structures at that meeting. So March 14th.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. That was a lot of information, very well presented. Thank you to the staff for that. And we will see you at committee meetings tomorrow. Thank you. Bye now. Jack Bauer says bye too.